I walked into that family dinner, knowing I'd hear it again. The same tired comments about how I was neglecting my duties as a wife, how I was too ambitious for my own good, how real women knew their place was at home. My mother-in-law Patricia had made it her personal mission to remind me at every gathering that my career was somehow a betrayal of everything she believed a woman should be. But that night, as I clutched my designer purse and felt the weight of my latest promotion letter inside, I had no idea that everything was about to change in the most unexpected way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You see, success has a funny way of revealing people's true colors, and betrayal doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes it comes from the people who are supposed to love and support you the most. This is the story of how my mother-in-law's judgment nearly destroyed our family, how a single bank statement changed everything, and why I learned that sometimes the people closest to you can be your biggest enemies. It's a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and the price of success. My name is Jessica, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 8 years, I've been married to David, a kind-hearted man who works as a high school teacher in our small town of Millfield. When we first met, I was fresh out of college with a degree in marketing and big dreams of making it in the corporate world. David was supportive from day one, encouraging me to chase my goals while he pursued his passion for education. We seemed like the perfect match, two people with different strengths who complemented each other beautifully. The problems started almost immediately after our wedding when I met David's mother, Patricia. She was 58 years old, had been a stay-at-home mom her entire adult life, and had very strong opinions about what constituted proper behavior for a married woman. From the moment I shook her hand at our engagement party, I could see the disapproval in her eyes as David proudly told her about my new job at a local marketing firm. "How nice," she had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I suppose you'll be giving that up once you're married and ready to start a real family." I had laughed it off at the time, thinking she was just old-fashioned and would come around once she got to know me better. David assured me that his mother meant well, and that she'd adjust to having a working daughter-in-law. He was wrong on both counts. The first few months of marriage were a constant battle of passive-aggressive comments and not-so-subtle hints about my priorities. Every family dinner became an interrogation about when I was planning to quit my job, when we were going to have children, and why I thought a career was more important than taking care of my husband. Patricia would make comments about how tired David looked, how he probably wasn't eating well because I was too busy at the office to cook proper meals, and how sad it was that modern women had forgotten what really mattered in life. In my day, she would say, always starting her lectures the same way, women understood that their most important job was creating a loving home for their families. We didn't need to prove ourselves in some corporate office. We knew our worth came from the love and stability we provided. David would try to defend me, explaining that we were both happy with our arrangement and that my career fulfillment actually made our marriage stronger. But Patricia had a way of making her disapproval known without directly confronting him. She would sigh heavily, change the subject, or make pointed comments about other couples where the wife had come to her senses and left work to focus on family. The situation got worse when I received my first promotion 6 months into our marriage. I had worked incredibly hard, often staying late and taking on extra projects to prove myself in a competitive environment. When my boss called me into her office to tell me I was being promoted to senior marketing coordinator with a significant salary increase, I was over the moon. David was equally excited, taking me out to dinner to celebrate and telling everyone who would listen how proud he was of my success. Patricia's reaction was decidedly different. When David shared the news at our next family gathering, she pursed her lips and shook her head as if she had just heard about a terminal diagnosis. "Well," she said slowly, "I suppose that means you'll be working even longer hours now. Poor David. I don't know how he manages with a wife who's never home." "Actually," David said firmly, "Jessica has always made time for our relationship. Her success doesn't take anything away from our marriage." Patricia looked at him with what I can only describe as pity. "Oh, sweetheart, you're such a good husband, always trying to see the best in people. But mark my words, this career obsession will catch up with you both eventually. You can't build a real marriage when one person is more committed to climbing the corporate ladder than building a home." I felt my cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment, but I bit my tongue. David had asked me to try to keep the peace with his mother, and I was determined to take the high road. I told myself that her opinions didn't matter, that what mattered was the support and love I had from my husband. But her words stung more than I wanted to admit. As the months went by, Patricia's comments became bolder and more frequent. She would call David during my work hours, expressing concern about how stressed he seemed and suggesting that maybe it was time for him to have a serious conversation with me about priorities. She would send him articles about the importance of traditional family values and the damage that career-focused wives could do to their husbands' mental health and success. Real women don't need to work, she told me point blank during one particularly uncomfortable family dinner. Real women find fulfillment in supporting their husbands and creating beautiful homes. This obsession with having a career is just selfishness disguised as ambition. I had been in the middle of describing a successful campaign I had just completed for a major client, feeling proud and excited to share my accomplishments with family. Her words hit me like a slap in the face, and for a moment I was speechless. Patricia, David said firmly, "That's not fair, and it's not true. Jessica works hard because she's talented and passionate about what she does. There's nothing selfish about pursuing your dreams." Dreams, Patricia scoffed. What about her dreams of being a good wife? What about her dreams of giving you children and creating a stable home? Those are the dreams that matter, David. Everything else is just vanity. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom where I splashed cold water on my face and tried to calm down. I could hear David's voice getting louder in the dining room as he continued to defend me, but I also heard Patricia's voice getting more emotional as she talked about how worried she was about our marriage and how she could see that David was unhappy. When I returned to the table, the conversation had moved to safer topics, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. David held my hand under the table, squeezing it reassuringly, but I could see the strain in his eyes. This constant battle between his mother and his wife was wearing on him, and I hated that my success was causing him stress. The breaking point came during my second year of marriage when I received another promotion, this time to marketing manager. It came with an even larger salary increase, and a small team of people reporting to me. I was thrilled not just about the recognition, but about the opportunity to mentor other young professionals and really make an impact in my field. David was so proud that he insisted on taking me out for an expensive celebration dinner, complete with champagne and a toast to my hard work paying off. When we shared the news with Patricia, her reaction was more extreme than I had ever seen before. She actually stood up from her chair and began pacing around the living room, wringing her hands and shaking her head. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "This is not normal, David. This is not healthy. Your wife is more interested in impressing strangers at work than she is in being a proper partner to you." "Mom, please," David said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Jessica's success is something to celebrate, not criticize. I'm proud of her, and you should be too." "Proud?" Patricia whirled around to face him, her eyes blazing. "Proud of a woman who puts her ego ahead of her marriage. Proud of a daughter-in-law who thinks she's too good for the life that women have been living successfully for thousands of years. This isn't progress, David. This is selfishness, pure and simple." I felt something snap inside me. I had been patient for over a year, trying to build a relationship with this woman who clearly had no interest in accepting me as I was. I had bitten my tongue through countless dinner conversations, smiled through passive-aggressive comments, and tried to understand her perspective even when it felt completely alien to me. But enough was enough. "Patricia," I said, standing up to face her, "I understand that you and I have different views about what makes a successful marriage and a fulfilled life. But I need you to understand that I'm not going to apologize for working hard and achieving my goals. David married me knowing exactly who I was and what I wanted out of life. If you can't respect that, then maybe we need to have a different kind of conversation about boundaries." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. David looked back and forth between his mother and me, clearly torn between the two women he loved most in the world. Patricia stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between rage and disgust. "Boundaries," she repeated slowly. "You want to talk to me about boundaries? I'm his mother. I've known him his entire life. I've watched him struggle and succeed, and I know what makes him happy. And what I see right now is a man who's slowly being pushed aside by a woman who cares more about her job than about him. That's not true, I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. I love David more than anything in this world. My career doesn't take away from that love. It adds to it. I'm a better partner because I'm fulfilled and challenged and growing as a person. You're deluding yourself, Patricia shot back, and you're deluding my son. Real women don't need constant validation from bosses and co-workers. Real women find their purpose in supporting their families, not competing with men in some corporate environment that will never truly accept them anyway. The words hung in the air like poison, and I felt every muscle in my body tense with anger. This wasn't just about different perspectives on gender roles anymore. This was personal. This was an attack on everything I had worked for and everything I believed about myself. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said quietly, grabbing my purse from the coffee table. David, I'm going home. I need some time to think about all of this. As I walked toward the door, I heard Patricia's voice behind me, sharp and triumphant. Running away won't change the truth, Jessica. Sooner or later, you're going to have to decide what really matters to you. And when that day comes, I hope you make the right choice for everyone involved. I didn't turn around. I couldn't trust myself to respond without saying something I would regret later. Instead, I walked out to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and cried harder than I had since my father's funeral 5 years earlier. David found me there 20 minutes later. He slid into the passenger seat without saying a word and pulled me into his arms. We sat there in the dark driveway while I sobbed against his shoulder, feeling like my heart was breaking for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. I'm sorry, he whispered into my hair. I'm so sorry she said those things to you. You don't deserve this. I don't understand, I managed to say between sobs. I don't understand why she hates me so much. I've never done anything to hurt you or your family. I work hard. I love you completely. I try to be respectful and kind. Why isn't that enough? David pulled back to look at me, his own eyes red with unshed tears. It's not about you, Jess. It's about her.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She's scared of change, scared of anything that challenges the way she's always understood the world. Your success makes her question choices she made 40 years ago, and that's terrifying for someone who built her entire identity around being a traditional wife and mother. But I've never criticized her choices, I protested. I've never said anything negative about her decision to stay home or suggested that her way of life was wrong. Why can't she extend the same courtesy to me? Because, David said sadly, some people can't see other ways of living as equally valid. They see them as threats. And when people feel threatened, they attack. We drove home in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts about what had just happened and what it meant for our future. I kept replaying Patricia's words in my head, trying to understand how someone could be so certain that their way of life was the only correct one. I thought about all the successful, happy couples I knew where both partners worked, where both partners supported each other's dreams and ambitions. I thought about my own parents, who had both worked throughout my childhood and had shown me that love and success weren't mutually exclusive. But mostly I thought about the look in Patricia's eyes when she called me selfish. There was something deeper there than just disapproval of my career choices. There was real hatred, real anger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was just the beginning of something much worse. When we got home, David and I sat on our couch and talked for hours about what had happened and how we wanted to handle the situation going forward. He assured me repeatedly that he supported my career completely and that nothing his mother said would change his feelings about our marriage or our future together. But I could see the pain in his eyes, the exhaustion that came from being caught between two people he loved who seemed incapable of coexisting peacefully. Maybe I should quit, I said at one point, the words feeling strange and bitter in my mouth. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I just stayed home and focused on being the kind of wife she thinks you deserve. David's reaction was immediate and intense. He grabbed my hands and looked at me with more seriousness than I had ever seen from him. Jessica Marie Thompson, he said, using my full name like my mother used to do when I was in trouble. If you quit your job because of what my mother thinks, I will never forgive myself. You are brilliant and talented and hardworking, and you deserve every success that comes your way. If anyone in this situation needs to change, it's not you. His words were exactly what I needed to hear, but they also made me realize just how much pressure this situation was putting on both of us. David was being forced to choose between his mother and his wife, and no matter what he decided, someone was going to be hurt. I hated that my career success was causing him pain, even though I knew logically that the problem was Patricia's attitude, not my achievements. Over the next few weeks, things got progressively worse. Patricia began calling David almost daily, expressing concern about our marriage and suggesting that he should be more firm about setting expectations for me as his wife. She sent him articles about the divorce rates among dual-career couples and the psychological damage that working mothers inflicted on their children. She even went so far as to suggest that my ambition was a sign of deeper character flaws that would eventually destroy our relationship. "She thinks you're manipulating me," David told me one evening after a particularly difficult phone conversation with his mother. "She thinks you've somehow brainwashed me into accepting a situation that's not in my best interest. What do you think?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know where his head was at. "I think she's lost her mind," he said firmly. "But I also think she genuinely believes she's protecting me from something terrible. In her worldview, ambitious women are dangerous to family stability, and she sees your success as a direct threat to my happiness." The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Patricia began involving other family members in her campaign against my career. She called David's older sister Rebecca, who lived 3 states away, and convinced her that David was miserable but too polite to admit it. She reached out to David's father, who had always been supportive of me, and filled his head with concerns about the long-term viability of our marriage. At the next family gathering, I could feel the shift in the room immediately. Where before I had felt like most of David's relatives were neutral or even supportive of my career, now I sensed suspicion and concern from multiple directions. People who had previously asked about my work with genuine interest now seemed to avoid the topic entirely. Conversations would die when I entered the room, and I caught several family members exchanging meaningful looks when they thought I wasn't watching. The worst part was seeing how much this was affecting David. He tried to act normal around his family, but I could see the strain in every interaction. He was defensive when anyone brought up our marriage, exhausted from constantly having to justify our life choices, and increasingly isolated from his own relatives because of their concerns about his wife. One evening, after a particularly tense family barbecue where Patricia had made several pointed comments about wives who prioritized career over family, David and I had our first real fight about the situation. "I can't keep doing this," he said, slumping onto our couch with his head in his hands. "I can't keep defending our marriage to my own family. I can't keep watching you be hurt by people who are supposed to love and support us both. So what are you suggesting?" I asked, though I was terrified to hear the answer. "I don't know," he said miserably. "Maybe we need some space from my family for a while. Maybe we need to set some serious boundaries about what topics are acceptable for discussion when we're around them. Or maybe," he trailed off, not finishing the sentence. "Maybe what?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "Maybe we need to consider whether this marriage can survive if we can't find a way to make peace with my mother." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had always known that this situation was serious, but hearing David articulate the possibility that it could end our marriage made everything feel suddenly real and terrifying. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" I whispered. "No," he said quickly, reaching for my hand. "That's not what I want at all. But I'm saying that I don't know how to fix this, and I don't know how long we can live with this kind of constant conflict and stress." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had led us to this point. 2 years earlier, I had been a happy newlywed with a promising career and a supportive husband. Now I felt like I was fighting for my marriage against someone who seemed determined to prove that my very existence was a threat to her son's well-being. I thought about my grandmother, who had worked as a nurse for 40 years while raising 4 children and maintaining a strong marriage to my grandfather. I thought about my college roommate Sarah, who was now a successful doctor married to another doctor, and how they supported each other's demanding careers while raising 2 beautiful kids. I thought about my boss, who had been promoted to regional manager while her husband stayed home with their newborn, and how happy and fulfilled they both seemed with their arrangement. All of these examples proved that Patricia's narrow view of marriage and womanhood was just that narrow. But knowing I was right didn't make the situation any easier to live with, especially when it was causing the person I loved most in the world so much pain and stress. The next morning, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our entire family dynamic. I decided that instead of continuing to defend myself against Patricia's accusations and criticisms, I would start documenting my actual contributions to our household and our relationship. I would gather concrete evidence that my career success was making our life better, not worse, and present it in a way that even Patricia couldn't dismiss or ignore. I started by calculating the exact financial impact of my career on our family's well-being. With my recent promotion, I was now earning nearly double David's teacher salary. My income had allowed us to buy a house in a great neighborhood with excellent schools, even though we didn't have children yet. It had enabled us to pay off David's student loans 2 years early, saving thousands of dollars in interest. It had given us the financial security to take real vacations, to help David's younger brother pay for trade school, and to start building a substantial emergency fund and retirement savings. But the financial benefits were just the beginning. My career had also given me confidence, expanded my network of friends and mentors, and provided me with intellectual challenges that made me a more interesting and fulfilled person. I was better at problem solving, more confident in social situations, and more aware of the world beyond our small town because of the experiences I had gained through work. Most importantly, my success had never come at the expense of my relationship with David. We still spent quality time together every evening and weekend. I still cooked dinner most nights, though David had also become an excellent cook and often took over kitchen duties when I had particularly busy periods at work. We still maintained an active social life, supported each other through challenges, and made all major decisions together as equal partners. As I compiled this information, I realized that what I was really documenting was the success of our modern egalitarian marriage. We had created a partnership based on mutual respect, shared responsibilities, and support for each other's individual goals and dreams. It was exactly the kind of relationship I had always wanted, and exactly the kind of relationship that Patricia seemed to believe was impossible or unhealthy. But I also realized that no amount of evidence or logical arguments would change Patricia's fundamental beliefs about gender roles and family dynamics. She had built her entire identity around being a traditional wife and mother, and accepting that other approaches could be equally valid would require her to question decades of choices and beliefs. That kind of self-reflection and growth seemed unlikely for someone who had shown such rigid thinking and personal animosity toward me. Still, I felt like I had to try one more time to bridge the gap between us. If not for Patricia's sake, then for David's sake, and for the sake of our marriage. I decided to arrange a private meeting with Patricia, just the two of us, where I could share some of this information and hopefully find some common ground that would allow us to coexist more peacefully. When I called Patricia to suggest lunch together, she sounded surprised but agreed to meet me at a quiet restaurant downtown. I spent the entire morning before our lunch rehearsing what I wanted to say and how I wanted to present the information I had gathered. I was nervous but hopeful that a calm one-on-one conversation might allow us to understand each other better and find a way forward. I arrived at the restaurant first and chose a corner table where we could talk privately. When Patricia walked in, I was struck by how tired and stressed she looked. This situation had been hard on everyone, including her, and I felt a moment of sympathy for this woman who genuinely believed she was protecting her son from harm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," I said as she sat down across from me. "I have to admit, I was curious about what you wanted to discuss," she replied, her tone cautious but not immediately hostile. We ordered our food and made small talk about the weather in the restaurant until our meals arrived. Then I took a deep breath and launched into the conversation I had been planning for days. "Patricia, I know we've had our differences about my career and what it means for my marriage to David. I wanted to talk with you privately because I think there might be some misunderstandings about how my work actually affects our relationship and our life together." She raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt, so I continued. "I've put together some information about the concrete ways my career has benefited our family, and I thought it might help if I shared some of that with you." I pulled out a folder with printouts showing our mortgage payments, the timeline of David's student loan payoff, and our current savings and investment accounts. I explained how my income had accelerated our financial stability and given us opportunities that would have been impossible on David's salary alone. Patricia looked through the papers with a neutral expression, but I could see she was paying attention to the numbers. "I'm not trying to diminish the importance of traditional homemaking," I continued. I have tremendous respect for the choice you made to focus on your family, and I know that David benefited enormously from having a mother who was dedicated to creating a loving home environment. But I hope you can see that there are different ways to contribute to a family's well-being, and that my career is one of those ways. For a moment I thought I might be getting through to her. She was nodding slightly and seemed to be considering what I had said. But then her expression hardened, and I knew I had made a mistake. "Do you really think this is about money?" she asked, her voice cold and dismissive. "Do you think that because you make more money than my son, that somehow justifies the way you've turned your back on your responsibilities as a wife?" I felt my heart sink, but I tried to stay calm and continue the conversation. "It's not about making more money than David," I said carefully. "It's about both of us contributing to our family's success in the ways that make the most sense for our individual strengths and interests. David loves teaching, and he's incredibly good at it. I love marketing, and I've been fortunate to find success in that field. Together we've built a life that makes us both happy and fulfilled." "Fulfilled," Patricia repeated, shaking her head. "That's what's wrong with your entire generation. You think fulfillment comes from impressing strangers and climbing corporate ladders. You think happiness comes from competing with men and proving you're just as good as they are. But real fulfillment comes from sacrifice, from putting your family's needs ahead of your own desires, from understanding that some things are more important than personal achievement." I could feel the conversation slipping away from me, but I made one last attempt to find common ground. "I understand that sacrifice is important in a marriage," I said, "but I don't think it has to be one-sided. David sacrifices for me, and I sacrifice for him. We both make compromises and adjustments to support each other's goals. That's what partnership looks like." Patricia leaned forward across the table, her eyes blazing with an intensity that actually frightened me. "Partnership," she said slowly, "is not what you have. What you have is a marriage where you've convinced a good man to accept less than he deserves, because you're too selfish to give him what he really needs. David needs a wife who will put him first, who will create a real home for him, who will give him children and focus on raising them properly. Instead he has a roommate who happens to share his bed and contribute to the mortgage." The cruelty of her words took my breath away. I sat there staring at her, realizing that this woman didn't just disagree with my choices, she actively hated me for them. There was no amount of evidence or rational discussion that would change her mind because her opposition to me wasn't based on logic or concern for David's well-being. It was based on a deep, fundamental rejection of everything I represented. "I think we should probably end this conversation," I said quietly, signaling the waitress for our check. "Yes," Patricia agreed. "I think we should. But before we do, I want you to know that I will never stop fighting for my son's happiness. I will never stop trying to help him see what this marriage is doing to him, and I will never accept you as the kind of wife he deserves." As I drove home from that disastrous lunch, I realized that the situation with Patricia was never going to improve through communication or compromise. She had made her position clear. She wanted me out of David's life, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. The question was no longer whether we could find a way to coexist peacefully. The question was whether our marriage could survive her determination to destroy it. The weeks following my confrontation with Patricia felt like living in a war zone where the battles were fought with whispered phone calls and carefully worded text messages. David tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I could see the toll it was taking on him. He would come home from work looking exhausted, and I knew it wasn't just from dealing with teenage students all day. His mother had launched a full-scale campaign to convince him that our marriage was doomed, and she wasn't fighting fair. It started with the articles. Patricia began sending David links to studies about divorce rates among couples where wives out-earned their husbands. She forwarded him blog posts about the psychological emasculation of men in modern relationships, and the inevitable resentment that built up when traditional gender roles were reversed. Every few days there would be a new piece of evidence in his email inbox, carefully selected to support her narrative that successful career women destroyed marriages. "She's relentless," David told me one evening as he showed me the latest message on his phone. "She sent me this article about how children of working mothers are more likely to have behavioral problems, and then she added a note saying she hopes we'll think carefully before bringing kids into an unstable situation." I felt my blood pressure spike as I read Patricia's message. We had been trying to get pregnant for the past 6 months, something that Patricia didn't even know, and seeing her use the possibility of future children as ammunition against me felt like a violation of something sacred. "She's trying to get inside your head," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's hoping that if she sends enough of these articles, you'll start to doubt our relationship." "I know that," David said, pulling me into his arms. "But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't affecting me. Not because I believe what she's saying, but because I can see how much energy she's putting into trying to break us up. It's exhausting to know that someone who's supposed to love me is actively working against my happiness." The articles were just the beginning. Patricia also started involving David's extended family in ways that felt calculated and manipulative. She would call his aunts and uncles, expressing concern about how stressed and unhappy David seemed whenever she saw him. She would mention to his cousins that she was worried about our marriage and ask them to reach out to David to see how he was really doing. The result was that David started getting calls and texts from relatives who had never shown much interest in our relationship before, all of them asking probing questions about whether he was happy and whether there was anything they could do to help. These conversations left him feeling like his entire family was watching our marriage for signs of failure, waiting for proof that Patricia had been right all along. My cousin Mark called me yesterday. David told me one Saturday morning as we were having coffee on our back porch. He wanted to know if we were having problems because my mom told his wife that she was concerned about us. I had to spend 20 minutes convincing him that we're fine, but I could tell he didn't really believe me. "What exactly is she telling people?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "That you're too focused on work to be a good wife, that I look tired and stressed whenever she sees me, that she's worried I'm not getting the support I need at home." David's voice was flat, and I could see how much it hurt him to repeat these accusations. The most insidious part of Patricia's campaign was how she framed her concerns as love and worry for David's well-being. She wasn't directly attacking me or saying anything that could be easily dismissed as mean-spirited. Instead, she was positioning herself as a caring mother who was worried about her son's happiness and just wanted what was best for him. This made it almost impossible for David to confront her directly without seeming ungrateful or disrespectful. When he tried to tell her that her interference was causing problems, she would respond with hurt and confusion, claiming that she was only trying to be supportive and that she couldn't understand why he was pushing her away when she was trying to help. "I feel like I'm going crazy," David confessed to me one night after a particularly difficult phone conversation with his mother. "She acts like she's the victim in all of this, like I'm being unreasonable for asking her to stop sending me articles and stop talking to other family members about our marriage. She keeps saying that she's only worried about me and that she can't help caring about my happiness." The situation escalated dramatically when Patricia decided to involve David's father, Robert, in her efforts. Robert had always been more neutral about our relationship, and while he clearly shared some of his wife's traditional views about marriage, he had never been openly hostile toward me. I had hoped that he might serve as a voice of reason, encouraging Patricia to accept our relationship and move on. Instead, Robert became Patricia's most effective weapon in the battle for David's loyalty. Unlike Patricia, who could sometimes come across as emotional or unreasonable, Robert was calm and measured in his approach. He didn't send inflammatory articles or make dramatic pronouncements. Instead, he had quiet, thoughtful conversations with David about marriage and responsibility and what it meant to be a good husband. "Dad thinks I should be more assertive about setting expectations in our marriage," David told me after a long phone call with his father. "He didn't say anything directly critical about you, but he made it clear that he thinks I'm being too accommodating, and that a strong marriage requires clear leadership from the husband." I felt a chill run down my spine as I processed what Robert's intervention meant. Patricia's emotional appeals and dramatic accusations could be dismissed as the ranting of an upset mother-in-law. But Robert's measured philosophical approach to undermining our relationship was much more dangerous because it sounded reasonable and thoughtful rather than vindictive. "What did you tell him?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I told him that our marriage works because we make decisions together and support each other's goals. But he kept pushing back, saying that equality in marriage is a modern myth and that someone has to be the final decision maker. He thinks that person should be me, and that your career success is preventing me from taking on that role." The conversation with Robert marked a turning point in how David's family treated both of us. Where before there had been some relatives who remained neutral or even supportive, now there seemed to be a unified front of concern about our relationship. Family gatherings became unbearable, with every conversation feeling like a subtle interrogation about our marriage and our future plans. At David's nephew's graduation party, his sister Rebecca pulled me aside for what she described as a heart-to-heart conversation about marriage and family priorities. Rebecca had always been friendly toward me, and I had considered her an ally in the family dynamics. But it quickly became clear that Patricia had gotten to her too. "I just want you to know that we're all worried about David," Rebecca said, her voice full of what seemed like genuine concern. "He's been different lately, more stressed and withdrawn. Mom thinks it might be related to the pressure he's feeling about your career and the expectations that come with being married to such a successful woman." "David hasn't mentioned feeling any pressure," I replied carefully. "In fact, he's always been very supportive of my work and proud of my accomplishments." "Of course he would say that," Rebecca said with a knowing smile. "David's always been the type to put on a brave face and try to make everyone else happy. But those of us who know him well can see the signs. He's not the same carefree, happy person he used to be." The implication was clear. I was making David miserable, and everyone in his family could see it except me. It didn't matter that David consistently told me he was happy and fulfilled in our marriage. It didn't matter that he actively supported my career and celebrated my successes. According to his family's narrative, I was either too selfish to notice his unhappiness or too manipulative to care about it. The most devastating moment came when David's younger brother Jake, who had always looked up to David and seemed to genuinely like me, started questioning whether our marriage was healthy. Jake was in his early 20s, just starting his own career, and I had enjoyed talking with him about work and ambition, and finding balance in life. But after months of Patricia's influence, even Jake began to view my success as problematic. "I just think it's weird that Jessica makes so much more money than David," Jake said during a family barbecue, his comment loud enough for several relatives to hear. "It seems like that would be hard on a guy's self-esteem, you know. Like, how do you feel masculine when your wife is the breadwinner?" David's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "My self-esteem isn't tied to how much money I make compared to my wife," he said firmly. "I'm proud of Jessica's success, and I'm proud of the life we've built together." But I could see that Jake's comment had hit a nerve. Even though David defended me publicly, I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. Patricia's months-long campaign was starting to work, planting seeds of insecurity and resentment that hadn't existed before. That night, David and I had our most serious conversation yet about whether our marriage could survive his family's opposition. "I feel like I'm losing myself in all of this," David said as we sat on our bed, both of us emotionally drained from the day's events. "I used to be confident about who I was and what I wanted out of life. But now I question everything. Am I really happy, or am I just telling myself I'm happy? Am I being a good husband, or am I being weak and passive? Are we building something real, or are we just postponing the inevitable problems that come with our situation?" His words terrified me because I could hear Patricia's influence in every question he was asking. She had successfully planted doubt in his mind about our relationship, and now those doubts were growing and spreading like a cancer. "David," I said, taking his hands in mine, "do you remember what you told me when I got my first promotion? You said that my success made you proud, that it inspired you to be better at your own job, and that you felt lucky to be married to someone who was passionate and driven. Do you still feel that way?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to separate his own feelings from the constant barrage of criticism and concern he'd been receiving from his family. "I do still feel that way," he said finally. "But I also feel exhausted from having to defend those feelings to everyone I love. I feel isolated from my own family because they think I'm making a mistake by staying married to you. And I feel guilty because I know this situation is hurting you, but I don't know how to fix it." It was around this time that Patricia's tactics took an even more personal and invasive turn. She began showing up at David's school during his lunch breaks, bringing him home-cooked meals, and using the opportunity to have private conversations about our marriage. David's colleagues began asking him if everything was okay at home because his mother seemed so concerned about his well-being. "She's making me look like either an abused husband or a liar," David told me after a particularly embarrassing incident where Patricia had brought him lunch and stayed to eat with him in the teacher's lounge, spending the entire meal expressing worry about how thin he looked and how stressed he seemed. "My principal asked me if I needed time off to deal with family issues," David continued. "I had to explain that my mother was just being overly protective, but I could tell he didn't really understand why a grown man's mother would be so involved in his daily life unless there was a serious problem at home." Patricia also began involving David's friends in her campaign. She would call the wives of his college buddies, expressing concern about David's marriage and asking them to encourage their husbands to check in on him. This led to awkward conversations where David's friends would ask probing questions about our relationship, clearly fishing for information they could report back to their wives, and ultimately to Patricia. The breaking point came when Patricia crossed a line that I never thought she would cross. She contacted my workplace. I was in the middle of an important client presentation when my assistant knocked on the conference room door and told me there was an urgent family emergency call. My heart immediately went to thoughts of David being in an accident or one of my parents being hurt. I excused myself from the meeting and took the call, only to hear Patricia's voice on the other end of the line. "Jessica, I hope you don't mind me calling you at work," she said, her tone falsely sweet and concerned. "I wanted to talk to you about David. I'm very worried about him, and I think we need to have a serious conversation about what's best for his future."
I was so shocked that someone had given her my direct office number, and that she had used a fake emergency to get me out of a meeting that I couldn't immediately respond. "I know you care about David," Patricia continued, "and I think deep down you know that this marriage isn't working for him. He's been so stressed and unhappy lately, and I think it's time for both of you to admit that you want different things out of life." "Patricia," I said, finding my voice and trying to keep it steady despite my rage, "I cannot believe you called my workplace and lied about a family emergency to have this conversation. This is completely inappropriate, and I need you to never contact me at work again." "I wouldn't have to resort to these measures if you were willing to have honest conversations about David's well-being," she replied, her mask of sweetness starting to slip. "You've been avoiding me since our lunch, and meanwhile, my son is suffering because you're too stubborn to admit that this marriage is a mistake." I hung up the phone without responding, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. I had to go back into my client meeting and pretend that nothing had happened, but I could barely concentrate on the presentation. The fact that Patricia had invaded my professional space felt like a violation that went beyond anything she had done before. When I told David about the call that evening, his reaction was more intense than I had ever seen from him. He was furious that his mother had contacted my workplace and mortified that she had lied about a family emergency to get me on the phone. "This has to stop," he said, pacing around our living room with more agitation than I had ever seen from him. "She's completely out of line, and I can't let her keep doing this to us." The next day, David drove to his parents' house and had what he later described as the most difficult conversation of his life. He told both Patricia and Robert that their interference in our marriage was unacceptable and that they needed to stop trying to convince him that he was unhappy or that our relationship was doomed. According to David, Patricia's response was to break down in tears and accuse him of choosing his wife over his family. She said that she could see how I was changing him, making him cold and disrespectful toward the people who had loved him his entire life. She claimed that the old David would never have spoken to her so harshly, and that my influence was turning him into someone she didn't recognize. Robert's response was more measured but equally manipulative. He told David that he respected his right to make his own decisions about his marriage, but that he hoped David would consider the long-term consequences of those decisions. He suggested that David was letting his emotions cloud his judgment, and that he might feel differently about our relationship in a few years when the novelty wore off. "They made me feel like I was the problem," David told me that night. "Like I was being unreasonable for asking them to stop interfering in our marriage. Mom kept saying that she was only trying to help because she loved me, and Dad kept implying that I was being naive and short-sighted." Despite David's confrontation with his parents, the interference didn't stop. If anything, it became more subtle and insidious. Patricia stopped calling me directly, but she continued her campaign through other family members.
She would express concern to David's aunts and cousins, who would then reach out to David with offers of support and advice. She would make comments to family friends about how worried she was about David's happiness, knowing that those comments would eventually make their way back to him. The constant pressure was taking a serious toll on both of us. David became withdrawn and irritable, snapping at me over small things that had never bothered him before. I found myself walking on eggshells around him, afraid that any mention of work or any sign of career ambition would trigger another round of self-doubt and questioning. Our relationship, which had always been built on open communication and mutual support, began to feel strained and artificial. We were both so focused on proving to ourselves and others that we were happy that we stopped actually being happy. Every conversation felt loaded with subtext. Every decision felt like it needed to be analyzed for what it said about our priorities and our future. The situation reached a crisis point when David's best friend from college, Mike, came to visit for a weekend. Mike had been in our wedding and had always been supportive of our relationship. But during his visit, it became clear that he had been talking to Patricia and had developed serious concerns about our marriage. "I've known David since we were 18, Mike told me during a private conversation while David was in the shower. And I've never seen him as stressed and conflicted as he's been lately. He used to be this easygoing, confident guy who knew what he wanted out of life. Now he seems anxious and uncertain about everything." "Mike," I said carefully, "David is stressed because his family is constantly questioning our marriage and putting pressure on him to be unhappy. It's not our relationship that's the problem. It's the interference from people who can't accept that we have a different kind of marriage than they think we should have." Mike shook his head. "I think you're underestimating how much this situation is affecting him. And I think you need to consider whether your career ambitions are worth the cost to your marriage and to David's relationship with his family." The conversation with Mike was devastating because it made me realize how successfully Patricia had managed to reframe the narrative about our marriage. In her version of events, I was a selfish, ambitious woman who was destroying a good man's happiness and tearing apart a loving family. David was the victim, trapped in a marriage that was making him miserable but too polite or too weak to admit it. The fact that this narrative was spreading beyond David's immediate family to his closest friends made me understand that we were fighting a battle we couldn't win. Patricia had turned our marriage into a public referendum on modern gender roles and career priorities, and she was winning by positioning herself as the concerned mother fighting for her son's traditional happiness. That night, after Mike had gone to bed in our guest room, David and I sat in our kitchen and had the most honest conversation we had ever had about our marriage and our future. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I love you and I want our marriage to work, but I feel like I'm being torn apart. Every time I defend you to my family, they act like I'm brainwashed or in denial. Every time I see how much this situation is hurting you, I feel guilty for putting you through it. And every time I try to imagine our future together, all I can see is more conflict and more pressure and more people questioning whether we made the right choice." I felt tears streaming down my face as I listened to him articulate the doubts that I knew had been growing in his mind for months. The man I had married had been confident and sure of himself, certain that our love could overcome any obstacle. But Patricia's relentless campaign had worn him down, made him question everything he thought he knew about himself and our relationship. "What do you want to do?" I asked, dreading the answer but knowing we had to face the reality of where we were. David was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands folded on the kitchen table. "I think," he said finally, "we need to make a choice. Either we figure out a way to completely cut ties with my family and build a life that doesn't include them, or we need to seriously consider whether this marriage can survive the kind of opposition we're facing." The ultimatum hung in the air between us like a sword. After 2 years of fighting for our relationship, we had reached the point where David was asking me to help him choose between his wife and his family. And the most terrifying part was that I wasn't sure which choice he was hoping I would make. The silence that followed David's ultimatum felt like the longest moment of my life. We sat in our kitchen staring at each other, both of us realizing that we had reached a crossroads that would define not just our marriage but who we were as individuals. The choice David was asking me to help him make wasn't really about cutting ties with his family. It was about whether we were strong enough to fight for what we believed in, or whether we would let other people's opinions destroy something beautiful. I reached across the table and took his hands in mine, feeling how cold and tense they were. David, I said softly, I need you to answer one question for me, and I need you to answer it honestly. If your family wasn't involved in this situation at all, if it was just you and me making decisions about our life together, would you be happy with our marriage? He looked into my eyes for a long moment, and I could see him trying to separate his own feelings from months of outside pressure and manipulation. When he finally spoke, his voice was stronger and more certain than it had been in weeks. Yes, he said firmly. If it was just us, I would be completely happy. I love our life together. I love how we support each other's dreams, how we make decisions as equal partners, how we've built something that's uniquely ours. The only thing that's making me miserable is watching other people try to tear down what we've created. His words gave me the courage I needed to say what I had been thinking for weeks but had been afraid to voice. Then we need to stop letting them tear it down, I said. We need to make a choice right now about what we're going to prioritize. Are we going to prioritize our marriage and our happiness, or are we going to sacrifice both of those things to keep peace with people who don't respect us or our choices? David squeezed my hands tighter. But if we cut ties with my family, that's it, there's no going back from that. I'll lose relationships that have been part of my life since I was born. And if we don't cut ties with them, you'll lose your wife, I said gently. Because I can't keep living like this, David. I can't keep defending our marriage to people who have already decided that I'm the enemy. I can't keep watching you tear yourself apart trying to please everyone. And I can't keep pretending that this situation isn't destroying both of us. We talked until 3 in the morning, going through every possible scenario and every potential consequence of the different choices we could make. By the time we finally went to bed, we had made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. We were going to take a 6-month break from David's family. No visits, no phone calls, no family gatherings. We would use that time to rebuild our relationship and rediscover what had made us happy before all the outside interference began. The next morning, David called his parents and told them about our decision. According to him, Patricia's response was predictably dramatic. She accused me of manipulating David into cutting off his family, claimed that this was exactly the kind of behavior she had been warning everyone about, and threatened to never forgive either of us if we went through with our plan. Robert's response was more measured but equally disapproving. He told David that running away from problems never solved anything, and that we were making a mistake that we would regret for the rest of our lives. He suggested that David was letting his emotions override his judgment, and that he should reconsider before burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. They're both convinced that you've brainwashed me, David told me after the phone call. They can't conceive of the possibility that I'm making this choice because I want to protect my marriage. In their minds, the David they raised would never choose his wife over his family, so this decision must be coming from you. Despite the predictable negative reaction from his parents, David seemed lighter and more relaxed than he had been in months. It was as if finally making a decision, even a difficult one, had lifted a weight off his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, we felt like we were on the same team again, fighting for our relationship instead of constantly defending it. The 6 months that followed were like a honeymoon period in our marriage. Without the constant pressure and criticism from David's family, we rediscovered all the things that had made us fall in love in the first place. We started going on weekend trips again, trying new restaurants, and having long conversations about our dreams and goals for the future. David's stress levels dropped dramatically, and I realized how much the family conflict had been affecting his health and well-being. During this time, I also received another major promotion at work. I was offered the position of regional marketing director, with a salary that was nearly triple what I had been making when David and I first got married. The promotion would require some travel and longer hours during busy periods, but it also came with significant flexibility and the opportunity to work from home several days a week. When I told David about the offer, his reaction was everything I had hoped for and more. He was genuinely excited about my success, proud of how hard I had worked to achieve this level of recognition, and supportive of my decision to accept the position. We celebrated that night with champagne and takeout from our favorite restaurant, talking about how the additional income would allow us to start seriously planning for the future we wanted together. I can't believe how different this feels from the last time you got promoted. David said as we sat on our couch, both of us relaxed and happy in a way we hadn't been for months. Before I felt like I had to defend your success to everyone. Now I just get to enjoy being proud of my incredibly talented wife. The promotion also gave me an idea that I thought might help heal the rift with David's family. I decided to make a gesture that would demonstrate how my career success was benefiting not just our immediate family, but David's extended family as well. I knew that David's youngest brother Jake was struggling to pay for trade school, and I remembered how David had mentioned wanting to help, but not being able to afford it on his teacher's salary. Without telling David initially, I looked into the cost of Jake's remaining tuition and fees. It was a significant amount of money, but well within our means given my new salary. I presented the idea to David as a way to show his family that my career success wasn't just about personal ambition, it was about creating opportunities to help the people we cared about. David was hesitant at first, worried that his family would see the gesture as manipulative or as an attempt to buy their acceptance. But ultimately, he agreed that helping Jake was the right thing to do, regardless of how his parents might react to it. We decided to approach Jake directly rather than going through Patricia and Robert. David called his brother and asked him to meet us for dinner, saying that we had something important to discuss. Jake was clearly nervous when he arrived at the restaurant, probably expecting us to ask him to choose sides in the family conflict. Instead, David pulled out a check that would cover the rest of Jake's tuition and handed it across the table. "Jessica and I want to invest in your future," David said simply. "We know how hard you've been working to get through school, and we want to help you achieve your goals without having to worry about money." Jake stared at the check in shock, then looked back and forth between David and me with tears in his eyes. "I can't accept this," he said quietly.
This is too much, and with everything that's been going on with the family. Jake, I said gently, this has nothing to do with family politics. This is about you and your education and your future. David loves you, and he wants to help you succeed. We both do. For the next hour, we talked with Jake about his plans for after graduation, his hopes for starting his own business, and his dreams for the future. It was the first truly positive interaction I had had with any member of David's family in over a year, and it reminded me of why I had wanted to be part of this family in the first place. When Jake finally accepted our offer, he hugged both of us and thanked us repeatedly. But then he said something that surprised both David and me. "I need to tell you something," Jake said, his voice serious. "I know what Mom has been saying about your marriage, and I know how she's been trying to turn everyone against Jessica. But I've been watching you guys tonight, and I can see how happy you are together. I think Mom is wrong about you, Jessica. I think she's wrong about a lot of things." It turned out that Jake had been having his own doubts about Patricia's campaign against our marriage. He had watched his older brother become increasingly stressed and unhappy during the months of family interference, and he had started to question whether Patricia's concerns were really about David's well-being or about something else entirely. "I think Mom is scared," Jake said thoughtfully. "I think she's scared that if women like Jessica can be successful and happy without following the traditional path, then maybe her choices weren't the only right choices. Maybe she's questioning her own life, and it's easier to attack your marriage than to deal with those feelings." Jake's insight was more perceptive than anything I had heard from any other family member, and it gave me hope that there might be a way to rebuild relationships with at least some of David's relatives. Over the next few weeks, Jake became an unexpected ally in our efforts to repair the family rift. He started defending our marriage when Patricia made negative comments, pointing out that David seemed happier and more relaxed than he had been in months. He also began sharing details about my career success and our financial stability that Patricia had either ignored or downplayed. "Did you know that Jessica's promotion means they can afford to buy a house in the best school district in the county?" Jake told his parents during one family dinner. "And they're talking about starting a college fund for their future kids that will be fully funded by the time those kids are ready for school. Jessica's career isn't hurting their family, it's making their family stronger." Jake's advocacy created a crack in the united front that Patricia had built against our marriage. Some of David's relatives began asking questions about why they had been so quick to accept Patricia's version of events without hearing our side of the story. David's Aunt Margaret called him to apologize for some of the things she had said, and to ask if there was a way to start rebuilding their relationship. But Patricia's reaction to Jake's change of heart was swift and severe.
She accused him of being naive and easily manipulated, suggested that David and I were using our money to buy his loyalty, and made it clear that she considered his defense of our marriage to be a betrayal of the family. The tension came to a head during Jake's graduation celebration. David and I had planned to attend the party that Patricia was hosting, our first family gathering in 6 months. We had hoped that the occasion would provide an opportunity for healing and reconciliation, especially given how well our relationship with Jake had been developing. Instead, the party became the stage for the most dramatic confrontation yet between Patricia and me. Everything started normally enough. We arrived at Patricia's house with a graduation gift for Jake and tried to blend in with the other family members who were celebrating. Some relatives seemed genuinely happy to see us and asked about our break from family activities with what seemed like sincere interest. Others were more reserved, but not openly hostile. Patricia was icily polite, greeting us with forced smiles and making sure we had food and drinks, but not engaging in any real conversation. I could feel her watching me throughout the evening, and I had the distinct impression that she was waiting for something. The explosion came when Jake stood up to give a speech thanking everyone who had supported him through school. He specifically mentioned David and me, talking about how our financial help had allowed him to focus on his studies instead of worrying about money, and how our example had shown him that it was possible to build a successful life based on mutual support and shared goals. "I'm grateful to my brother David for always believing in me," Jake said, raising his glass, and to Jessica for showing me that family means supporting each other's dreams, not tearing them down. The room fell silent at Jake's pointed comment about tearing down dreams, and I could see Patricia's face turning red with anger. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I will not sit in my own home and listen to my family be lectured about support and love by someone who has done nothing but cause division and conflict since the day she married my son." The room erupted into chaos as Patricia unleashed months of pent-up anger and resentment. She accused me of manipulating David, of using my money to buy Jake's loyalty, and of systematically destroying the close-knit family that she had spent decades building. "You think you're so successful," she spat, advancing toward me across the living room. "You think your career and your money make you better than the rest of us. But let me tell you something, Jessica. Real success isn't measured in promotions and paychecks. Real success is measured in the strength of your family relationships and the love you create in your home." "I have never said or implied that I think I'm better than anyone," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm despite my racing heart. "I have always respected your choices and your way of life. All I've ever asked for is the same respect in return." "Respect?" Patricia laughed bitterly. "You want respect for destroying my son's happiness. You want respect for putting your selfish ambitions ahead of your responsibilities as a wife. You want respect for teaching my youngest son that money matters more than family loyalty." That's when David stepped between his mother and me, his face flushed with anger I had rarely seen from him. "Mom, stop," he said firmly. "This has gone far enough. Jessica has never done anything to deserve this treatment, and I'm not going to stand here and watch you attack her anymore. She's poisoned you against me," Patricia accused, tears streaming down her face. "The David I raised would never speak to his mother this way. She's turned you into someone I don't even recognize." "No, Mom," David said, his voice getting louder. "You've turned yourself into someone I don't recognize. The mother I grew up with taught me to treat people with kindness and respect. She taught me to judge people by their actions, not by whether they fit into narrow categories of what's acceptable. She taught me that love means supporting the people you care about, not trying to control them." The confrontation might have continued escalating if Robert hadn't intervened, stepping between Patricia and David, and suggesting that everyone needed to calm down and take a break. But the damage was done. The celebration was ruined. Jake was devastated that his party had become a battleground, and several family members left early to avoid being caught in the middle of the conflict. As David and I drove home that night, both of us emotionally drained and upset, I realized that reconciliation with Patricia was never going to be possible. She had made it clear that she would never accept me as part of the family, and that she would continue fighting against our marriage as long as we were together. But something unexpected happened in the days following Jake's graduation party. Instead of rallying around Patricia after the public confrontation, several family members reached out to David and me privately to express their support for our marriage and their disapproval of Patricia's behavior. David's cousin Sarah called to apologize for believing Patricia's version of events without getting our side of the story. David's uncle Tom sent a long email, explaining that he had been uncomfortable with Patricia's campaign against our marriage from the beginning, but had stayed quiet to avoid family conflict. Even Robert called David to say that while he didn't agree with all of our choices, he thought Patricia had crossed a line with her public attack on me. Most importantly, Jake decided to take a stand that would permanently alter the family dynamics. At a family dinner the following week, which David and I did not attend, Jake announced that he would no longer participate in any family gathering where we were not welcome. He told Patricia that her treatment of me was unacceptable and that he was ashamed of the way our family had behaved toward someone who had shown them nothing but kindness and generosity. According to Jake, Patricia's response was to give him an ultimatum: choose between his loyalty to his brother's marriage and his place in the family. Jake chose his loyalty to us, and Patricia cut off contact with him immediately. The family split that Patricia had been warning about for 2 years finally happened, but not in the way she had expected. Instead of David choosing between his wife and his family, multiple family members chose between Patricia's narrow worldview and their own sense of fairness and decency. The result was that Patricia found herself increasingly isolated, while David and I found ourselves with more family support than we had ever expected. 6 months after Jake's graduation party, David and I received news that would change our perspective on everything that had happened. I was pregnant with our first child. When we shared the news with the family members we were still in contact with, the responses were overwhelmingly positive. Jake was thrilled about becoming an uncle. Robert expressed genuine happiness about becoming a grandfather, and several of David's cousins and aunts reached out to congratulate us and offer their support. Patricia's response, delivered through Robert, was predictably different. She expressed concern about whether I would be able to balance motherhood with my demanding career, suggested that this pregnancy might be the wake-up call I needed to reevaluate my priorities, and made it clear that she expected significant changes in our lifestyle once the baby arrived. But her concerns fell on deaf ears. The family members who mattered to us had already proven that they could accept and support a marriage based on equality and mutual respect. Patricia's opinions about traditional gender roles and family hierarchies had become irrelevant to our lives and our future. As I write this, our daughter Emma is 6 months old, and our marriage is stronger than it has ever been. David took paternity leave when she was born, and we've worked together to create a parenting arrangement that allows both of us to be actively involved in her care, while continuing to pursue our professional goals. I work from home 3 days a week. David has adjusted his schedule to handle morning duties, and we've hired a wonderful nanny to help during the days when I need to be in the office. Patricia has never met her granddaughter. According to Robert, she maintains that she's waiting for us to come to our senses and start living like a real family. She continues to believe that my career success is a temporary phase that will end once I fully embrace my role as a mother. She's wrong, of course. My career has continued to flourish even after Emma's birth, and I recently accepted another promotion that will make me the youngest vice president in my company's history. David is incredibly proud of my success, and he loves telling people about his accomplished wife and the amazing life we've built together. But the most important thing Patricia got wrong was her assumption that our marriage couldn't survive the challenges we faced. In reality, fighting for our relationship against such determined opposition made us stronger as a couple. We learned to trust each other completely, to communicate honestly even when conversations were difficult, and to prioritize our partnership above all other relationships. We also learned that family loyalty shouldn't require sacrificing your own happiness or compromising your core values. The family members who truly loved and supported us found ways to accept our choices, even when those choices were different from what they would have made for themselves. The family members who couldn't accept our choices revealed that their version of love was really about control and conformity. Today our life looks nothing like the traditional marriage that Patricia thought David needed. We share household responsibilities based on our schedules and preferences, rather than traditional gender roles. We make financial decisions together, as equal partners. We both pursue challenging, fulfilling careers, while also being devoted parents. We've created a home filled with love, respect, and mutual support. And we've proven that sometimes the people who claim to know what's best for you are really just afraid of what your success says about their own choices. Patricia's insistence that real women don't work was never really about protecting David or ensuring his happiness. It was about protecting her own worldview from the challenge that our successful marriage represented. The bank statement that showed my substantial income wasn't just a number on a page. It was proof that women could build careers, support families, and create marriages based on partnership rather than hierarchy. It was evidence that the traditional model Patricia championed wasn't the only path to happiness and fulfillment. Most importantly, it was validation that David and I had chosen each other wisely. We had built something beautiful together, something worth fighting for, something that could withstand even the most determined attempts to tear it down. Our story isn't really about money or career success, or even family conflict. It's about the courage to live authentically, to support each other's dreams, and to build a life based on love and respect, rather than other people's expectations. It's about learning that the people who truly belong in your life will find ways to celebrate your success, not tear it down. And it's about discovering that sometimes the best way to honor your family is to show them what real love and partnership actually look like, even if they're not ready to see it yet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.